Kia ora, Lara here, and today I'm going to be playing with the Season Greetings collection. Now this collection is pretty cool if you're looking at the papers that are kind of on speed play here. One side's kind of a summer Christmas and the other side's sort of more of a wintry setting. There's some gorgeous acrylic shapes, there's some pretty cute stickers that were on the sheet, and this set here that I'm going to work with, make these cards, is a VIP only card kit that you can access through the store. And I've already gone ahead and cut up some of the pieces. I'm actually running a workshop at home on Monday night, I think it is, with some people coming over to make some of these cards. So they're pretty cool. So there's lots of colouring in this card kit. So that's kind of the technique or the skill that's being taught within that. So the instructions are all provided on the sheets for the VIPs to work on. You make 3 each of 6 different cards, so that's 18 cards. But I decided I didn't quite need 18 cards with a whole lot the same within that, so that's why I'm using the kit to run a bit of a workshop. Anyway, so the colouring techniques that are being used, so with the Spectrum tri-blend markers, they have 3 different shades. So you've got a light, a mid and a dark, and normally you use the light sort of for a base, then you pull in some mid to add shading, and if you need a bit more shading you add in the dark, and then you go over again with the light or with a blending pen, and that sort of merges the colours together so it looks like grown-up colouring, not children's colouring. So you can see here that I'm just going around what could be considered a snowman, but these are sandmen or sand people that I am shading in, and I'm just following the instruction colours, the instructions for the colours of the different blend markers, and they tell you exactly what to do with them and what to colour with each part of the Spectrum markers. So for example, it said light for the head and body, and so I've sort of done that. It also said to use the dark of that particular colour to colour in the sparkles that you just saw me do. So each of the cards has some different sparkles on them, and it's kind of cool that you can actually colour these and that the colour stays from these markers on that shiny surface, and so you've got a variety of different sparkle colour choices when you colour them in. So instead of just being the clear dots or the clear ones, you're able to make them all different colours. So the instructions sort of give some measurements there as well as to what part or to where to place the different pieces. This tape is quite tricky to get off, but it does look really cool once you've peeled the backing off. And with this particular card, I then stuck down the pieces. And it would be a good idea in general to make sure you trim off any of these pieces of the shimmer trim stuff. If you've cut it specifically to the perfect size, that's great, but I just allowed a little bit more to then trim off close to the card edge, just in case it didn't quite work. So I'm using some intense black ink here to stamp one of the titles. You'll notice that I put the foam mat from the stamp underneath the card there. It just really helps to get a good surface and a good print when you do the stamp. So I'm using some of the 3D foam dots. The instructions say to use the foam tape, but the dots are just handy, I found, for workshops rather than using up lots and lots of the tape. It's kind of easy just to give a few bits of the foam dots, and then each kit kind of has them, or each person has some, and then they're able to lift up some of the components from the rest of the card. So I'm now going to work on the second card. Now with these cards I do follow the instructions for the colours and for the papers and stuff, but you could turn them over and use the other side if the temperature or the season is appropriate. So I am doing the summer Christmas themes because I live in New Zealand and it is actually summer at Christmas time, not winter. So I love this collection, and I love when Close to My Heart comes out with these summer Christmas kind of collections. So I'm just looking around for all the pieces that I need for this, and I did wonder about, with this card, using the stripy side rather than that dotty side of that paper there. But first up, I'm just going to follow all of the colouring instructions. So it talks about the scallops being alternate between the light and the middle colour of either the coral or the gold brown, and so just working through and following each of those as I go. It seems to come together pretty quickly. I did do one set as a few weeks ago when I was getting ready, thinking, hey, maybe I'll do this as a workshop type setup. So just following the instructions for the colouring. I love this little crab holding the Christmas lights. A few years ago there was a fox stamp holding Christmas lights, and I love that too, and it's one of the cards that I brought out for my workshop, my buffet workshop that I have for Christmas cards that I've run a couple of times and will be running again near my sister's place, or at my sister's place, a wee bit further away from home. So you'll see there that I've also coloured in those little clear sparkles again using one of the blendy markers, so it just changes the colour of those sparkles again. So again, just adding the little lights, different colours for the lights on the crab's set of lights that it's holding up. And yeah, just again, love this crab. It's kind of just this sort of cool feature for this warm summer kind of Christmas. So I've got all the components prepared, and now I have to stick down the papers. Now, before the last card that I made, no, it's not this card, it's one coming up soon. With this one, you have to sort of create an inverse dovetail on the card. So I sort of marked the middle, I marked 1 centimetre up, and then I'm just using my mini trimmer or my smaller trimmer to create that sort of V shape down the bottom. So there we go, that's stuck down nicely using that gorgeous colour. And I'm just now adding the dovetail on the other pieces and getting ready to stick those down. So the crab is there. I love how the colour from the markers really looks cool on the crab, and it helps it look dimensional rather than just sort of this flat object. And stamping on the jingle shells. So the crab's ready to go on. I'm going to add the 3D foam tape just to give it a little bit more lift, and just pop it central to the top of the card there. I'm now going to add the tabs, and again I sort of fight with the shimmer trim to make it suitable, so to release the tape at the back so it's sticky. So I'm not sure if longer nails helps. I do find it's a good one to keep on the roll instead of separate pieces, because on the roll you can always keep a little bit of the shiny stuff so it's easier to peel off. But because I've already gone ahead and pre-cut all of the pieces in the little workshop packs, that's the way it is. So now able to stick down all the gorgeous little shell shapes and then add those little shimmer dots that I've already coloured. So there's another wee gorgeous card. The next one working on is a Sandy and Bright. Love this jandals paper. So in New Zealand we call them jandals. In some places I think it's thongs that they call them, but the Kiwi kind of term, or the New Zealand term for them, is jandals. So again, there's the colouring, and this time it's more about just some shading rather than full colouring of our sand person, which kind of looks a little bit more like a snow person, especially with the Christmas hat on. Kind of wondered if it needed more of a cap or a bucket hat or something, which would be kind of a little bit more New Zealand, I guess, if you're thinking of Christmas at the beach more than a sort of warm hat with a pom-pom at the end, but that's okay. Anyway, it's quite cool having the instructions for all of the colouring. It really helps to, I guess, learn the different techniques and learn how these markers work. It wasn't till recently when I was following instructions for some different cards that I got using these markers, and since then it's become one of my favourite ways to colour stamps, or to, what would you say, to make images and things stand out a little bit more, or to give them a point of difference. I normally would have used watercolour paints or watercolour pencils or something like that, but I am really liking the vibrance that using these markers gives. Now I pulled out one of the blending markers and then found out that it was actually dry, so going to get rid of that blending one, and thankfully I had a second one spare, which worked heaps better, as you can see coming in here. So normally I would use the light colour to blend, but because in this instant we weren't using any of the lighter colours, I was using, it was just on the plain white, so I needed to use that blendy tool just to soften the colour and pull it out a little bit further. So there goes that gorgeous jandals paper, and then there's another couple of layers. So I'm going to stamp the sentiment. Because I have to put the shimmer trim sort of above and below it, I kind of need it ready so that I can work out the positioning properly. So I'm using the Versamat here. It's got handy measurements and stuff on it for working out, and based on the instructions it tells you sort of 2 inches up or 1.5 inches or however size from the bottom, and it's got those measurements. So I'm able to sort of use that as a guide, and it's quite handy having the lines off on each side as well, because that helps to position things so that they're straight rather than on an angle or not. So in this card, I should have stuck this down onto the Jandals paper before I stuck the Jandals paper down, because I hadn't trimmed the shimmer trim to exactly the right height. So it did take a little bit of fiddling to get these trimmed off so they didn't look uneven or cut on an angle. So adding the sand person or the snow person on there, and then just those gorgeous little jandals and shells and things to tidy it up. Now, I couldn't quite find my sparkles, so you can see me here looking like, where are they? And I can sort of possibly see them over to the left, but that's okay. I found another packet, and I have coloured them in using I think it was an antique blue that they asked us to do. Right, moving on to the next card. So this one uses a little bit of two different colours in the blending process, or in the colouring of the snow person. So that was an interesting technique that I hadn't really explored before, using more than one colour. So just popping the light, I think it was the light gold brown colour on here, and then it told me to use the light antique blue to add that shadowing in over on the left side. So that's sort of what I do. And because I'd used the two different colours, I just pull out the other blending tool to pull those colours in together so they combine. So there we have the majority of it, and I'm going to add the starfish down the front, putting them into that coral colour. So it goes through, the instructions sort of walk through each of the different coloured pens and tells you what to colour with them. So makes it really simple, really straightforward. So it's one of those times that it's quite handy to be a maker or VIP, because this is such a cute card kit, and great instructions and fun cards for people on this side of the world to make. And I have seen some of our other makers actually convert these to a more of a cooler Christmas kind of focus, which is really cool too, and it just shows the versatility of some of these things. So I am now just sticking down all the components, again following the instructions, using the measurements, and again trimming off the shimmer trim. And now I'm going to stick down with the foam dots, the sand person, and place it on the card. I'm not using the measurements exactly for some of these placements. I'm kind of just going by what I can see on the card example in the instructions as well. So now I'm going to stamp that greeting on there. It's always really scary stamping a greeting onto a card that you've pretty much made already. And I was thinking as I did these that what would I do if I messed up that stamping? And I think I'd probably end up stamping it on another piece of cardstock and then fussy cut around it, layering it on top, perhaps using foam dots or something to lift it up to make it look like that was the way it was meant to be. So moving on to some of the taller cards now. These are not sort of the same, the 4.25 times 5.5 inches that is. They're a much taller card, which actually is quite nice sometimes for a bit of variation. And I noticed that Close to My Heart has just come out with, I think it's 5 by 7 inch cards, which are going to be quite fun to play with as well. So with these cards, again, as per all of the cards in this collection, there's a bit more colouring and shading and blending to do, and it's got my favourite little character from the collection as well, from the stamp set, with the crabs holding all of the Christmas lights. When I was colouring this in, it reminded me heaps of having Christmases at my parents' beach house. We're not doing that this year. We're having a home Christmas, which I also look forward to. But there's something quite nice about Christmas at the beach, especially when the weather's warm. And I think there's been the odd year we've actually been able to go and swim in the ocean. It's quite a cold part of the country and a cold beach. But sometimes when it gets really hot, it doesn't matter how cold it is, it's always quite nice to get into. I remember when my kids were wee and when I was younger, I'd get in regardless of how cold it was. I think as we grow up, we either lose that enthusiasm for doing silly things, or we maybe we get more sensitive to the cold and stuff like that. So now it's time to assemble the card, and I assemble the very base piece down. And this other piece here, I'm going to stick some components on it before I stick it to the base. The reason is, again, that shimmer trim, I'm going to be cutting that down so that it comes off each side of this piece, because this sits onto the base colour that I've already picked. Now I'm just using the mat here to work out the measurements, and I go and I do the mat again for measurements, but I make a bit of a mistake, but luckily it peeled up okay based on the angle. So this piece of paper was kind of just too short, so I had to lift it up a little bit and just used the card as the example rather than the exact measurements. And there we go, that's fitting quite nicely, so I can trim those off. And I'm sort of getting the card together, so now I can actually stick it down onto that base piece before adding the other components. So I'm going to stamp the sentiment on this piece of White Daisy cardstock. Again, I've pulled sort of that wee stamping foam out from underneath to get a good impression with the ink, and sticking that piece down before adding all of the gorgeous wee coloured elements to it. So the little starfish that you can see here, I have pre-stamped using some different inks. I just thought it was going to be easier for the workshop to have these sort of pre-done, especially when the focus is the colouring. So the kind of the technique or the skill that's being taught and shared within this set of cards is the blending of the Spectrum tri-blend markers, so that works all right. So there's some more dots that I needed to colour to add some of that gorgeous dimension. And then we're going to move on to the very last card in our collection, another little gorgeous snow person. So in this card, it's another Seas and Greetings type one. There's two different little cluster elements of the shells that are going to go onto it. And as I was putting these together, it's like there's lots of little techniques that we use when we're making cards that we can also use in our scrapbooking. So these little shells, I think, are going to make gorgeous little embellishments in future layouts or future cards as well. Just love the way they layer and can be clustered, and I think part of that is the gorgeous colours that are used for the colouring based on the suggestions or the guides in the instructions. So the shells take a mixture of both a coral and a gold brown. It's quite nice being able to do them in different colours. So the two sort of scallop shells are they. In this one uses the light and medium coral, and the other uses the light and medium gold brown. So you can add variation because it's a stamped image and colour things the way that you want them, rather than just being stuck with a sticker that you have to, that's the colours, you don't get to change or get to choose what they're like. A little bit like the colouring too of the sparkles. So you get to change the colour of those to suit. So just colouring in the snow person's little hat here. Again, it was one where I used the shading rather than colouring the whole body, and then use that blending tool or that blending marker just to draw the colour out a little bit and blend it in towards the centre of our snow person. So now I'm going to stick down the different pieces and get ready to put the shimmer trims and all that kind of stuff. So part of this, once I actually get the shimmer trim backing off, is to work out the placement of it, and the measurements did include the whole card. So you'll see that I've laid out the card even though I haven't quite stuck the pieces down, but I've laid it out so that I can do the measurements, not exactly, but use them as a bit of a guide for getting it ready. So finally got that piece unstuck, and then working out where that piece sort of needs to go and making sure the bit in the middle is going to fit okay before trimming off each side of the shimmer trim. So now I'm going to stamp the sentiment onto the piece of paper. Got that going, and it's ready to stick down onto the actual card. And then I'm going to stick down the whole piece before I add all of my coloured images. And in this one I don't use the foam tape, I just put them straight down and at the different points on it. It didn't, because the snow person was kind of underneath those other little shapes, I didn't see the need for the layers. So I do put one 3D foam on one of those little shapes down the bottom there, and then add on my coloured dots. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed this sort of speed look at this workshop, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with a few people at home on Monday. Thanks for watching.